Good morning, everybody. And on behalf of the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, the Ohio Corn Marketing Program, the Ohio Small Grains Marketing Program, and the Ohio Soybean Council, we welcome you to Food Dialogues Toledo, Balancing Food Production and Clean Water. My name is Joe CORNELY. I work with the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation. This morning, you're going to be participating in a couple of panels. One explores the events around August the 2nd of 2014, when nearly 500,000 people in Toledo and surrounding areas were told, do not drink the water. Our second panel then will follow up on those events and broaden the issue to finding the right balance between two equally important objectives, having clean water and viable food production. Now, the session is being streamed live online, so in addition to all of you in the room, we'll be joined by literally billions of participants online watching from their personal computers and smartphones. And we hope to cover a lot of ground in a very short amount of time, so the discussion will move quickly. Before we get started with the actual live stream, I want to share a little bit about how you can get involved in Food Dialogue. We'll be taking questions from you here in the audience during the panel, and you can write the questions down on note cards at your seats. We'll collect them, get those to the moderator. Now, not every question will get addressed today, as I'm sure you will understand, but the discussion will continue in the future online at fooddialogues.com and on our Facebook page. And then you can also follow the conversation today on Twitter. I think we've got a sign up here, but the hashtag is #FoodD. We intend for the conversation today to remain constructive and respectful, even if we don't all agree on all of the issues, so hope we'll keep that in mind. And a quick technical note, please turn your cell phones to silent so that we don't have any ringing going on during the session today. So thanks for coming and being part of our event. We hope you listen, learn, and can share some new information with others as we continue the conversation about protecting both our water and our food industry. I want you to help me welcome Gail Hogan. Gail is our Emmy award-winning broadcast journalist who has worked in Columbus television and radio news for over 30 years. Gail retired from the TV industry in September of 2014. Currently, though, she partners with Ohio State University's Ross Heart Hospital on wellness and community health projects promoting heart health. And as a heart disease survivor, Gail is passionate about heart health education and has spent more than 25 years working for the Central Ohio chapter of the American Heart Association. Gail is a Toledo native, and as a Bowling Green grad, it pains me to note, a graduate from the University of Toledo. She travels up to this part of the world quite frequently to visit with her family who live here in the Toledo area. She's married to Dan Hogan, and they have 3 grown children. So with that, we turn it over to our moderator, Gail Hogan, and time to start Food Dialogues. Gail?
Thank you, Joe, and thank you all for joining me today. It is my pleasure to be here for Food Dialogues Toledo, and while I don't have the expertise of those folks up here, I do share with them what I share with you. I want clean water to drink. So that's why we're all here today, and I'm excited that you're all joining us here. We are streaming live at Foresters on the River, overlooking the Maumee in downtown Toledo. And we are excited that you can be part of today's discussion, either in person or by watching from your computer or smartphone. As a former reporter, I truly enjoy that opportunity to speak to experts on all sides of an issue, and I'm very curious, so I love to ask questions. I love these sorts of things where I get to find out more and share that information with people like you. Today's event is brought to you by the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, Ohio Farm Bureau, Ohio Corn Marketing Program, Ohio Small Grains Marketing Program, and the Ohio Soybean Council. The U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance represents more than 80 of the top farmer and rancher-led organizations and agricultural partners in the nation. They're working together to listen to and then answer America's questions about how food is grown and raised through live events like this, and also online at fooddialogue.com. We could also like to thank the Lucas County Farm Bureau for their help here as well. And let me start now by introducing the participants on our panel. We have Sandy Bhin. She is the president of the Toledo Lighthouse Society and executive director, Lake Erie Waterkeeper Inc. Sandy, pleasure to have you here. Next to Sandy, we have Chuck Campbell, acting commissioner of Toledo's water treatment plant. Chuck, welcome to you. We have Rich Nachazel, president, Destination Toledo. Welcome to you, Rich. And then on the end here, we have Adam Sharp, Ohio Farm Bureau Vice President of Public Policy. We will be taking questions from both in-person and online audience members at the end of this session. We have just 45 minutes for this panel, so we're trying to get to as much as possible, and my job is to keep things moving. And one reminder, we want to give an opportunity for everyone, and please be respectful of the other voices in the room. I know sometimes we don't all agree, but we can have a respectful conversation. Since we are streaming online, we encourage everyone to follow along on Twitter and get involved in the conversation. You can do this by following us at USFRA using the hashtag #PoundFoodD. Okay, here we go for the first panel. Lessons from the Toledo water crisis. August 2nd, 2014 changed our world. Until then, most people were only slightly aware of the problems associated with algae blooms. But on that date, winds blew a toxic bloom directly into the area of Lake Erie, from which the city of Toledo draws its drinking water. The city announced a do not drink alert, and suddenly nearly 500,000 people were without water. In the aftermath, the dialogue about the relationship between agriculture and water quality has elevated in importance. Today, we kick off our discussion as we focus on Toledo as ground zero, really. Looking back, what did stakeholders do well? What did they not do well? And looking forward, what are the lessons to be learned? And this panel will share perspectives from farm and environmental communities, city government, and local business interests. And Chuck, you have that opportunity to answer first, because my question to you is, before this happened on August 2nd, what kind of priority, was there a high priority on algae blooms having to do with Toledo water?
Algae blooms had been a priority prior to this, and in fact, the person sitting next to me, Sandy, and I had looked at getting early warning detection out there, and unfortunately we didn't get it out as quick as we needed to. We were relying on analytical, so as we got our analytical, we'll start with July 31st, we had a non-detect for our analytical, and then we come to August 1st, and all of a sudden we've got an exceedance. So that's where we moved into, was preparedness at that point. So going from there to here, we're much better prepared than we would be had this happened now.
So Rich, as far as when it comes to people vacationing on Lake Erie and coming to Toledo, do you ever think about algae blooms before this date?
We did actually. We've lobbied for additional economics to be put toward algae issues for a number of years because it does impact visitation and the money that brings. What happened in Toledo really brought up a broader issue of the overall health of the lake that needed to have quick attention brought to it. We have an economic engine in Lake Erie that's generating, just for our 8 counties along the lake shore, $12.9 billion in tourism spend, and that's a tremendous amount. 28% of the whole state tourism spend is in these 8 counties. And it's a bigger jobs issue than I think people may be aware. We employ in those 8 counties 119,000 people, making $4.4 billion in wages. So that was what was at risk, and what is at risk.
Well, it's big business. And that big business then, when we come to you, Adam, you have to present it to the folks at the State House and make them realize it's about health, it's about jobs, it's about so many different things. Where was this on the lawmakers' radar?
Yeah, it was interesting. Obviously, it was of interest to the state government, and really probably a couple years prior to Toledo with Grand Lake St. Mary's is probably the first real experience where I think both the agriculture community certainly started paying attention, much more attention, and realizing that we were doing good things, but there's a lot more we needed to do when we started working with Grand Lake St. Mary's situation. Same with state government, I believe. Then along comes Toledo situation, and I think that made it then a statewide issue. That's when the issue became not just a local issue around Grand Lake St. Mary's, but individuals, lawmakers across the state realized this is statewide.
And so it became more important to our lawmakers at that point. More on their radar? Do you think it's still there?
Yes, I do. And I know that right now during the budgeting cycle, of course, here in the state, we're doing a 2-year budget cycle. So right now, the General Assembly is discussing their next budget. And I know water quality is a big topic, and what resources can be allocated and programming should be allocated to deal with water quality, I know is a top priority of theirs, which is good, and that it's good to know that. And I think that this is what drove that. This is unfortunately this is what drove that, but that's where we are right now.
Sandy, from a consumer standpoint, before this happened, do you think people were even thinking about this? I can tell you, I don't think my parents knew what an algae bloom was, or if they did, they knew a little bit about it until all of a sudden they couldn't drink water.
They didn't connect with a year before it in Carroll Township, 2,000 people had a do not drink warning because of the microsystem, the same issue. But the state didn't respond. It wasn't very big. They just kind of dismissed it, unfortunately. Excuse me. And I think the detection system that Toledo now has, if they looked at Carroll Township, could have been put in place, and this whole thing could have been diverted. That's the good news. And there's been a lot of response from a consumer standpoint in terms of the levels that are safe for drinking of microcystin and treatment and testing, and the end of the pipe, so to speak, is being really diligently addressed. The source part of it, what's causing it to get rid of it, is the weaker part right now, and that's what really needs to be looked at.
And that's why we have all these folks together from all these different types of departments. Chuck, let me go back to you. After this crisis, what did Toledo do since then to possibly forestall anything like this happening in the future? And I know there's only so much you can do, but...
Well, one of the first things that we did is we identified that we need to update our preparedness. So we went to our employees to begin with, and we trained them on how to handle incidents like this. Not just this, but several different disasters that can happen and how to be prepared. We also took all of our standard operating procedures and redeveloped them to be able to handle not only a situation like this, but anything that Mother Nature can throw at us will be much more prepared. That's on the employee side and the preventative side, but then again on the treatment side, Ohio EPA did provide funding for us. We secured $6.1 million to do improvements to our treatment plant. They were in the form of no interest long-term loans. We could use grants, that would be nice. But we have improved our chemical feeds. We've put in activated carbon at 3 different places. That's going to be operational within about 60 days now. So we'll be looking at July with activated carbon and increased potassium permanganate treatment systems, where we should be able to knock this organism out and then get the toxin out of it and adsorb it. So we're going to be in a much better position.
That's from the city intake side. So how do we stop it before it gets to that point where we need to worry about these things?
Well, I could go on and on and on, so I was
But
kind
we
of
won't let
short.
you.
Yeah, I thought you cut me off. On the science end of it, we've been working with the University of Toledo. They've secured some grants from the Ohio Board of Regents, and Ohio State University has partnered with them. University of Cincinnati has partnered with them, and Dr. Tom Bridgman, a brilliant algal scientist, is going to have a network system of monitoring buoys that I believe they got some partners also with NOAA that are going to help on that. And we had 1 buoy in last year at the end of the event. We're going to have 20 monitoring buoys out there this year, just the ones that I know of. And so we're going to have a much better early warning grasp on what's going on out there.
Sandy, what are some of the lessons that Toledo and really Ohio learned as a result of this?
Well, I think we learned that the testing was iffy at best, and they couldn't agree on it, and there was a lot of confusion in the beginning of this.
And you think that problem's been solved?
I think that problem has largely been solved, and I think thanks to Toledo and the other water intakes, public water intakes along the western basin of Lake Erie, it's also expanded to other locations where they have harmful algal blooms and microcystin readings in the water. So I think Toledo has done a service to the wider community that is facing algae issues. Yes, I think that's been done very well. I think identifying the sources and where it's coming from, source water protection, which Lucas County is looking into, excuse me, is the weaker part of it. Green Bay and other places know exactly where the nutrients are coming from, and they know where to target and look for and get the reductions. I think that's the part we really need to focus on now.
So Adam, being with the Farm Bureau, and I know that's part of what people point to as problem, how are you working with farmers, working with lawmakers to bring this attention and where everybody does come together?
Yeah. To continue even your first question, so yeah, two bills have been passed. One prior to Toledo, and one actually subsequently to Toledo. So you have Senate Bill 1, Senate Bill 150, both passed by the legislature. And these weren't easy to do, but were the right thing to do. And farmers were supportive of these pieces of legislation. And what they do is the first bill requires that every farmer in the state who's applying fertilizer on more than 50 acres has to go through a certification process. So it's a training. It's talking about nutrient management. So that's very important. You're constantly, it's continued training, continued education for farmers around nutrient management. So that's very important. The second bill is focused just in this watershed. So the second bill focuses on restricting the application of nutrients, fertilizer and manure, on ground that is either frozen, snow-covered, saturated, or potentially saturated with rain. So that's important, and there was a lot of work done with lawmakers, with many interest groups to put that bill together, and we think those are great efforts to deal with the issue. Beyond that, though,
And are those voluntary or mandatory?
those are both mandatory. Yeah, those are both mandatory requirements. So beyond that, there's a series of voluntary actions as well that will bolster these same efforts. Working with the Ohio State University and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, getting into the heart of the issue. So from the agricultural side, we know there's multiple sources. So we know that there's various sources that contribute to the issue in the lake. But from the agricultural perspective, from our piece of the puzzle, we have to figure out what can we do in the fields that helps us with the challenge. We saw for many years from the 70s into the mid 90s a reduction. All the measurements showed that our nutrients were reduced. They were less and less and less because of a series of conservation programs that farmers were putting in place, different types of tillage practices, different types of conservation methods. Then suddenly from the 90s forward, the numbers in particular for dissolved phosphorus started to increase again. Why? When we have more soil testing, we have more conservation practices on the ground, we're using less phosphorus. In fact, we're in a phosphorus deficit use now. So we're actually drawing phosphorus instead of applying more on the ground. So we're applying a lot less phosphorus, much more conservation-oriented practices. And at the same time, you have this challenge, this increase in dissolved reactive phosphorus. That's a real challenge we got to sort out. Ohio State University and U.S. Department of Agriculture, along with funding from many organizations, is looking at specifically what's happening in the field that we can do to adjust our practices to help resolve that challenge, because it's an unknown. It's an unknown.
Rich, when it comes to tourism, do you think people shy away because of what happened last year, or have you been able to convince people that the state of Ohio knows that this is going to be a problem that's taken care of and that people aren't worried about going to the lake?
Yeah, one of the things I worry about is the word of the incident was spread pretty wide at the time, and I saw an article that said there's 294 billion emails sent out every 24-hour period. In some days, it felt like they were all talking about the water issue in Toledo. But I had 6 groups in town that week. Our convention bureau did, and there was a 200-person wedding at the Art Museum. Not many people get to have a wedding at the Art Museum, and that wedding went off, and it was very successful. I had a National Amateur Baseball Federation World Series, Collegiate World Series in. So Saturday morning when I talked to their tournament director, he had about 800 college kids that had to go play baseball that day and would have really liked to take a shower after and have some cold water to drink involved with the event. They ended up leaving town, canceling Saturday and Sunday's events. And since that time, we have talked to them and others that were involved, others that weren't involved, and reassured them that Chuck, the city, the county are all doing a great job. The preparedness is much better than it was last year, and the National Amateur Baseball Federation rebooked for this coming summer, so they'll be back. And it was a 48-hour incident that left a pretty big black eye. But what we've been doing is trying to flood the images out there, like the beautiful background we have here. Tell them about the great things happening in the region naturally, especially with our metro parks and with the lake. And if we give them enough good information about what's going on, I think it'll help get rid of the past image.
We've talked a lot about the good things that have happened as a result of this. Sometimes, as they say, it takes a big issue to bring an issue to the forefront. Sandy, what are some of the disappointment things that you see going forward that we really haven't been able to tackle yet?
The source part, just where it's coming from exactly. I think the ag community has stepped forward in doing a good job, but I don't think they also measure in the ditches, upstream, downstream. We all know that wastewater, fertilizer, manure, stormwater, and to a great extent, even here, septic systems, failing septic systems along the shoreline are the issues. What's changed in the last 30 years? We now have a lot more tile drains that drain it quicker, and when you have a rainfall, the stuff just exports from the fields into the system. Manure and the way we have our animals and the way we raise our meat is different than it used to be. We've done a lot of development along the shoreline as well. One of the major things that's happened that was positive, not for Toledo, actually it happened before Toledo, is some of us looked at the Detroit wastewater plant, which is right at the bottom of right where Lake Erie comes in, services 30 to 40% of Michigan's population. So it's a huge plant. And we started questioning how much phosphorus they were putting out. We were able to get a 750,000 pound reduction just through questioning and permit changes. I would challenge everyone here to look at the low-hanging fruit, if you will. And it didn't cost much to get the phosphorus out of there. That's the amazing part. It just kind of happened quietly. There wasn't much of a debate. Are there other places in our system, streams, rivers, ditches, that are laden with this heavy load that we could actually get reductions if we knew what they were and actually targeted the economics and the resources to do it?
Does anybody want to piggyback on what Sandy has said?
Yeah, I would agree. A comprehensive look at sources and nutrients is absolutely something that's important to dealing with this issue, and that's something that there's a lot of discussion about. Some things are moving forward, which is good in that area, but there definitely needs to be more done in that area. I'd say the other big challenge is always when we've gone around the state and talking to farmers, but also many other folks in rural communities, and asked what is the big challenge for you? What's your concern when it comes to water? And typically what it usually comes down to is they identify a series of issues and actions that want to be taken, but there's never funding. There's never enough funding.
I was going to say, we need money to do all these things that we've talked about.
And that's something that, unanimously, there was always agreement in these discussions of funding. So looking for funding sources for our state to fund important actions that sometimes aren't the most sexiest thing to fund, which is infrastructure. Is very difficult sometimes to get funding for because it's not, it's that basic need. It's the thing we need. We need to have our infrastructure constantly improved and worked on, but it's not the sexiest issue to fund all the time. So that is very important. And I think finding probably new resources in multiple sources, not just government. It shouldn't just be government. It should also come from private investment and industry as well, and from residents and many others. Everybody should help fund this, but we should look at new ways to help fund major water activities in the state of Ohio.
Well, Chuck, you
couldn't have
mentioned
said
different
that better
ways.
myself. Thank you. The state and the federal government do step forward with some funding, but in the form of no interest loans long term, but grants really help. And in particular, back in the day, we used to have funded mandates. So when a mandate comes out, that's even more important to have funding associated with it. Thank you.
But the other thing is Lake Erie was the comeback kid. I mean, we've been through this before. We actually reduced it. I have a plan here that's like 600 pages long that actually laid out exactly where the sources were before and what was going on. Governor Rhodes was a great leader, and the federal government helped him manage it. We don't have that kind of management over the plan, okay, so we can see where there's actual reductions and tick them off, and then help you to get the resources if we show that that's an important part to make sure that that gets accomplished. So many places, Chesapeake, Everglades and things, 20, 30 years, and I keep hearing it's billions of dollars and it'll take 30 years. I think if we know where it is, I think all of us have the will to make this happen, and we want to do it as economically feasibly as possible, cheap as possible. So we just did $17.5 million to the agricultural community for BMPs. I have no idea of how many pounds of phosphorus or nitrogen that's going to reduce. We need that kind of measurement. We need to, get our feet to the fire. We did it before, and we did it because we had a master plan. We held people's feet to the fire, and every state and every input was important. 1 pound of phosphorus equals 300 to 500 pounds of wet algae.
So if we put a master plan together, as you suggest, who should be part of that master plan?
It should be done by the federal government and the state government. And we're going to see a 40% reduction coming out of Annex 4 from the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement soon. But they don't identify the sources. And like I said, there was that low-hanging fruit in Detroit wastewater plant, and had some of us not looked at it and found it, the 750,000 pounds, one place, it didn't cost them much. So are there other places, maybe technology. One thing that's been missed in Lake Erie, I think, is technology. If the field tiles, they're always going to be there. The farmers need them. We need them for the food production. If the ditches are transporting a lot to the lake, is there some collection process in that ditch where we can give it back to the farmers? And is there some cheap technology that might help? Maybe we'll get bigger bang for the buck doing that than some of the other things we're doing.
Adam?
Don't know.
Yeah, there's a series within the agricultural world. I think there's a series of very interesting conversations, actions, and research projects going on right now to look at different ways that a nutrient, manure in particular, what ways can we utilize manure, move manure, utilize it better within the agricultural space, or maybe even what can we do in the municipal world with biosolids being moved into and utilized within the agricultural space. We do some of that now. Is there more opportunity? I know there's some interest in actions going on there.
What's that mean?
Biosolids being waste material from municipal treatment facilities.
Okay, so we're talking about sewer systems.
We're talking about
Sewage
that's right.
sludge, we could have
Sewage
spent
sludge.
lime from our water treatment plant, which a lot of those nutrients have been recycled in the agricultural community for many years.
The other part, when you look at different, who should be part of this master plan, right, in this discussion? The other piece that we haven't talked about yet is the other, and Sandy mentioned it briefly, but the other states in Canada. And we know that, that all of our sources of nutrients aren't just, coming from Ohio. We also know Michigan and Indiana and also down the channel from up north. So we know that there's multiple places that we need to have the comprehensive plan in place, because we do have to address each of these areas and make sure we identify those sources and then also those reduction targets, because that's important to have something that's actually going to work in the long run.
Is it hard to work with all these other states then? I need to get it together.
Governor Rhodes led it before, and they called all the states together in the federal government, and they met every year. He actually took it a step further in the end and actually had mercury limits and looked at mercury in fish and was a leader in that. He got the gill nets rescinded. I found out from Darcy Egan from Cleveland Plain Dealer. He said Rhodes was just a tremendous leader. We need the political leadership to put these plans together, to get the states together, to help us all to be part of that process and make it happen. I do have to say on manure, on the issue of manure, one of the disappointing factors is the application rate for manure. If you have phosphorus in your soils and you're doing these nutrient management plans, the amount of phosphorus you can have for fertilizer from what I call the row croppers, the regular farmers, is 40 parts per million of phosphorus per acre. But if you have manure, it's 150. And phosphorus is phosphorus. And some of us, since this is such a hot button, nutrients, we need to take a look at that.
We're talking about things that are long-term. What do we do in the short term? I mean, you've still got people coming this summer, Rich, that want to be part of whatever fun we have here in Northwest Ohio. And Chuck, you've got to worry about people's drinking water. And right now it's early stages, and so far so good. So what do we do in the next year, 3 years, 5 years that can improve our situation?
Let me just make a point that there were things that didn't happen for most of the small businesses in our region that could happen, should have happened by now. And some in our audience, if they haven't gotten this, it should be one of the takeaways they have from this panel, is they should have a water emergency plan. Most of our restaurants in the Toledo area are small businesses, and I was told over 350 of them were closed by the health department because we always assumed we would have clean, usable water. So they didn't have water emergency plans, which if they had them and filed them with the health department, they could have fully operated through the whole issue. And that's what some of our successful operators did. That's why there was a wedding at the Art Museum, and that's why the other 3 weddings downtown happened, because there were emergency plans in place. So for small businesses out there, wherever they might be, that should be a crucial thing to do in the short run.
And they may have learned their lesson from that crisis then maybe.
But charter boat captains taking people out in the water, seeing the green algae, lose business, and if the algae's there, they're stuck.
Right. And Chuck, what can we do in the short term then to help people drink clean
Well,
water?
short term and long term, I think. One is the messaging. We're currently working with all the communities that are source water of Lake Erie, their infrastructure, the water treatment plants, and the Ohio EPA. We're going to be meeting over the next couple weeks to discuss the new public health advisories that have come out from US EPA and how we message that correctly and get it to the restaurants, get it to our industries, get it to our community properly. Then to the long term, we touched on just a second ago. I wanted to answer that. One of the other things that we had done is we brought in a blue ribbon panel of experts from academia. The University of Toledo was participant, other large municipal water systems, industry experts and US EPA and Ohio EPA to discuss how we have a long-term solution. And their report's coming out very shortly, but they've given us a toolbox that we can use for the future to plan.
We're going to some questions from the audience, and this piggybacks on what you've just talked about. One wants to know, how well are all those stakeholders working together? Do you see cooperation? Do you see people looking at each other and trying to understand everyone else's point of view? Anyone?
Yeah, you can start now.
Well, I'll start with our activities within the state of Ohio. We're having regular meetings down at the Ohio EMA, and every director, the governor, or their representative is in the room at the time, and we're planning to make sure that everything's taken care of. Our communication with Ohio EPA and US EPA has been excellent, and we've already got plans well laid for this summer to have pilot testing, treatment, what's going to work the best. I had mentioned the University of Toledo has secured funding to look at the algae early warning itself all the way through our treatment process and out to the customer's tap. And we've had regular meetings with Toledo Metropolitan Area Council of Governments, the watershed groups. Sandy could probably add on to that too. I think very well.
Yeah, we have a group called Healthy Water Ohio that's come together here in the state. Now this is on the private side, so Chuck was talking about the governmental side and a lot of that coordination on the private side. A group of conservation organizations, farm groups, industry folks, tourism, and many others coming together to talk about, here's a series of priority issues that we collectively also want to make sure that we're pursuing and finding funding to make sure we do it properly. And I mentioned, Sandy's comment earlier about the $17 million coming to the to the Western Lake Erie Basin for farmers' use. Those are some of those immediate activities, and you're seeing good partnership around that activity in particular. A lot of partners in that program to put conservation practices, increased conservation practices, in place on the fields in Western Lake Erie Basin. So that's very proactive in a good collaborative effort between the states. So it's Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana. Farm groups, the Departments of Agriculture, the Departments of Natural Resources, and others working with farmers, working with conservation groups to put those practices in place. So a very good demonstration, I think, of partnerships that are working well.
Next question from the audience, and we touched on it earlier. Is it time for stronger policies that ensure all livestock and crop farmers only apply nutrients in amounts crops need to grow? Should current voluntary programs be made mandatory? And Adam, you talked about a couple mandatory ones. I'm not sure what the voluntary ones are and how far we take that then.
Yeah, we already have a couple I just mentioned already, so we won't jump back into those unless we want to. But 2 mandatory programs already that are focused, but one statewide, 1 to 24 counties. So is there additional discussion around agriculture? Absolutely. A couple of things that are happening are demonstration farms. So in the western part in the Western Lake Erie Basin, right in the middle of the Western Lake Erie Basin, one of the projects we're working on with multiple groups is demonstration farms. So someplace where we can set up and show practices, both current practices that we know are helpful, but then as we learn more, new practices that farmers may not be as familiar with, to come and be educated at those demonstration sites. So that's, we think, is going to be very important. Sandy mentioned the ppm, the levels of nutrients. One of the other projects that Ohio State's working on, and we think is very important, is looking at the current recommendations on nutrient application. And those are out of date. There is work that needs to be done on nutrient application recommendations for farmers and to update those recommendations, because we know some of those are very much out of date. So there is definitely work there that we think also will be positive. There's a number of other voluntary activities as well, and discussions, of course, of additional mandatory actions.
Rich, do you see companies getting together, businesses getting together to talk about themselves, to share best practices? Like you said, the folks who had the wedding in the museum, it went forward. So how are the other businesses learning about what to do?
Yeah, a lot of people in our industry have shared resources since this incident, and I would mention a few of them: the Small Business Association, the Chambers of Commerce, the Red Cross didn't have in this region a water emergency plan at the time that ours happened, but decided to develop it immediately thereafter. So there's lots of tools out there that weren't in place last summer.
Here's another question from the audience. And This question says that Ohio need more funding for water initiatives, which we've all answered yes. If I had a large check today, I would be able to give it to you all and your problems would be solved. I do not have that. This question states Ohio has received nearly $900 million in federal Farm Bill conservation funds since 1995. I have to admit I don't know if that's accurate, but if it is, what will the money be used for? Is there any left? You know?
Yeah, the Farm Bill is an ongoing set of programs in conservation. And we mentioned already this additional $17 million that's coming in. Now, that's also under the Farm Bill. But there's already a high level of conservation activity statewide that farmers engage in under the Farm Bill. That number is probably accurate or near accurate. It's a fair amount of money. A lot of these are cost share programs, and that's an important part that needs to be discussed too. Is when these dollars come in, and particularly this $17 million, it's a cost share. So it's not just handing over a blank check to the farmer. It's the same as we talk about with with water treatment. It's cost share. So the farmer has to come up with a certain amount of money as well in order to take advantage of those dollars and be able to draw those dollars and use them on their farm to either build additional manure storage or maybe to purchase additional equipment that will help till nutrients into the ground, or maybe put in conservation practices, specifically filter strips, buffers, riparian areas, other things, wetlands that are helpful. We're on a net gain of wetlands in this country right now because of the Wetland Reserve Program. And the Wetlands Reserve Program is a Farm Bill program. It incentivizes farmers to build out wetlands. So that's a positive. We need to keep doing more of that. It is a positive to make sure that when these practices, though, are put in place, that they can continue to stay in place as well. So important programs, and obviously there's never enough money, but that's okay. We also recognize it's cost share, and farmers are very interested in the programs. We got to make sure the programs, though, are easily accessible.
Chuck, you talked about what Toledo did after the crisis. Can you talk to other communities and say, this is what we did and this is what you need to do? Who else in Ohio needs to update their municipal water systems so that they can learn from you and we don't have those problems?
Well, we are working on that currently in several different groups, but I don't believe this is just an Ohio phenomenon that Sandy has mentioned, and let's not forget our neighbors. US EPA, let's not forget the International Joint Commission of the Great Lakes with our Canadian friends. It's Joan Rose, you mentioned Annex 4. I think she's going to head that up, and she's going to bring some scientists from Singapore and Canada down this August. So we're pretty global. I don't think it's just...
You're global, and yet a question right here says, are you taking this to Fort Wayne, Defiance, Napoleon, locally as well as some of those other places?
Absolutely.
Are you getting response?
We
Because it talks about funding, and if there's no money, they
Yeah,
have
I'm
good
probably
intention.
going to defer that one to Sandy. Sandy works more with the watershed groups than I used to. I haven't currently. I'm making water right now. She's been doing it on the preventative end, I'll say.
They're all cooperating. And the water end of it and the testing and the treatment, there's a lot of cooperation, there's a lot of awareness. No one wants this to happen in their community. So it is much better post-Toledo than pre-Toledo. There's just, I mean, you've led the way, and in a good way, even though, and the incident that happened, let's remember that Toledo didn't have to test for microcystin. There was no requirement for them to do it. They didn't have to tell the public and protect their health. They did. And other plants in the area did the same. That's remarkable in this day and age when you're doing something above and beyond that can have the consequences that it did. And I hope the story at the end of the day is that Toledo actually became a leader for water testing and addressing this problem, as opposed to 500,000 people couldn't drink the water for a couple of days, because I think there's been a lot of positive outcomes that have come out of it.
I'd like to add on to that just one little thing too, that thank you, Sandy, and you can go online to our website, City of Toledo, and you can look at our buoy and our probes that are out there right now with direct reading, real-time monitoring.
What are we hearing about this year's algae blooms? Anything that, early warning signs? I know there are tests that are taken throughout the spring and summer. At this point,
It's going to be a different year. We have a lot more science. We have a lot more engineering and technology behind it. We're going to have many more probes out there on buoys in the lake. The monitoring data is overwhelming. So we're going to have a great early warning system this year.
A couple weeks ago, NOAA put out their mid-forecast, and it was good. The volumes coming into the lake were much less. But in the last couple of days, we've had extremely heavy rainfall, so stay tuned. Just not sure. I think also temperature is also, we have had pretty cool summers. What was amazing about Toledo is It was after one of the coolest, driest Julys on record. And it was a happenstance of wind that just coagulated all the algae, and it went down 12 feet and sat there for 3 days and created havoc for their treatment process. But the other thing is, in terms of looking at the whole picture, you know, a mass balance of what's coming into the Western Lake Erie or Lake Erie watershed, how much nutrients are actually purchased and coming into it. I see a lot more animals being added to some of the meat operations. So that means, to me, more manure, more nutrients. So as we're taking it out, what are we bringing in? Toledo wasn't able to reuse their biosolids or their sludge from the wastewater plants in the last year. Somebody said it's 100,000 pounds of phosphorus being reintroduced into the system. We need to look at the whole system and make sure that we're actually reducing in the whole system, because if not, we're losing ground and we can't afford to do that.
Well, Chuck, you talked about what you were doing in Toledo and how you're spreading that word and other things. And it's an early stage right now, and you say there's better monitoring. If there's better monitoring, though, that doesn't really solve the problem. If you get better monitoring, early monitoring, how does that help you help the public?
It gives us a chance to turn up our treatment systems. And our chemical costs are very high, and it's not a limiting thing. We want to make sure that we treat the water properly and provide a good, safe drinking water to our customers. So the early warning that we get, the more treatment options that we have, it's about an hour and a half to get the water from our intake into our low service pump station, then about another 3 or 4 hours to get it to the treatment plant. And that gives my operations staff quite a bit of time to make some operational changes. So it's a great early warning system for us, and we have new treatment systems where we're feeling pretty confident this year.
Here's a question from the audience. Is there any research or planned research to identify point sources of phosphorus entering the watershed?
Point source, overwhelming, yeah. Point sources, just for, if people don't know, are the ones that come out of a pipe, as opposed to the runoff.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the difference.
I've got 2 NPDES permits in the city of Toledo that we deal with. We have a stormwater MS4 permit, and we have a sanitary sewer permit. Our point sources are well regulated.
They're well regulated, but as in Detroit, they had that same permit, and yet when we questioned that permit and said, can you do better and reduce the phosphorus, we got a massive reduction. Michigan, in fact, on the Annex 4, I just listened to a webinar where they're going to get their 40% reduction from 3 wastewater plants, because each and every day, unlike agriculture or what's running off the land, every day there's a discharge from the wastewater plants that contain phosphorus, and normally those plants are located near the edges of the rivers that come into the lake and impact them. So reductions we can get there are real and would be very helpful, and to the extent that it's economical, that's low-hanging fruit. And you know, people need to take a look at their wastewater treatment systems and see if they can get the phosphorus levels down.
Rich, when it comes to tourism, do you think that will help lawmakers understand this better? I would think that we just need clean drinking water, and that in itself would be something that they think is very important. But how much do they look at that business part?
Well, I was really impressed with the meetings I attended, the hearings about the whole water issue, and I saw fear in their eyes with what happened here. 500,000 people losing their drinking water. It was so serious that I think the reaction has been serious, and so I am confident that they get it now. That it wasn't just Grand Lake St. Mary, Grand Lake in Central Ohio, and this was the next big thing. What would the next big thing be if they didn't take it seriously?
Adam, do you see the lawmakers taking it more seriously since the crisis, from the clean water, but also business standpoint?
Yeah, and I give a lot of credit to the Great Lakes Caucus, as they call themselves, but a number bipartisan, so Democrats and Republicans across the Lake Erie shore here, who've led with hearings and discussions and have had a lot of good ideas and have helped drive legislation that is addressing these issues. The couple pieces we already talked about, but a number of the funding issues and other things that they've helped drive, as well as our members in the federal side too. So the Ohio General Assembly definitely a lot of interest and good leadership from a number of members. But even at the federal level, the activities of Congressman Bob Latta, Marcy Kaptur,
Because this can't just
the
be an
senators,
Ohio issue. This has
yeah,
to
our
be-
senators, both Portman and Brown, have all done bipartisan, have done a nice job, a really nice job of pulling together and looking at options, looking at ideas, in supporting legislation to help address the issues. So I think that's very important to recognize, both at the state level and the federal level. A lot of good activity.
I totally agree, but stay tuned because we have the drinking water issue that happened in Toledo, and then we have the levels that just came out of microsystem that can be in treated drinking water that's now being evaluated and discussed. The next phase of what US EPA is coming out is microsystem in contact, recreational contact, which is if you're in the water, and how many readings are there out there, and how do we understand that? And I think that's going to be an important issue for the public and also has huge economic impacts because if people see the green and they're afraid to go in it or, you're not supposed to literally touch it because you can ingest it through your skin, and especially animals are really vulnerable to it. That's a huge economic hit that the lake itself and the benefits of the lake itself are going to take. So we really need to do source reduction seriously.
Out of curiosity, myself, we've talked about these algae blooms and we know that they're dangerous or toxic. What can happen to people? Well, I don't really know. If they drink it, if they're in the water with it.
Well, health hazards have been identified by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Just currently, May 11th, they came out with their new public health advisory, and you can have internal organ damage, liver, kidneys, you can have neurotoxin effects from it, and ultimately it can be acutely toxic, and there have been people that extremely high exposures can die.
Here's a question from Chuck on Twitter. How do we better understand the difference between phosphorus and dissolved phosphorus so we can adjust accordingly?
Yeah, and that's a good question.
And I don't know the
Yeah,
difference.
that's a great question. That's one of these challenges we talked about. Well, if we're putting all these conservation practices on the ground, are they helpful? Yes, they are. But that gets you from here down to here someplace, and that's good. We're making a big reduction, and we're very proud of that. But getting from here on down, that next step is the real challenge, right? So what's happening in the physiology out there in the soil? Why dissolve phosphorus now and on the increase versus the reduction? Those are the questions that several of these different research projects are going to help us understand. When you're looking at the different types of agricultural production, is there different types of equipment that we could use that would be helpful? Is there different types of ways that we can take the nutrient, whether it's manure or the fertilizer, and either apply it differently or put it in different forms to apply it? We have to look at our crop uptake. We have to look at things even as kind of radical, if you will, as the Clean Air Act. It's been so successful, but that also means that there's 20 pounds less of sulfur dropping on each acre of farm ground every year. Well, that actually changes your pH. So there's some studies going on with Ohio State University looking at what does that mean in the field. So do the farmers need to then adjust our practices to compensate for that? Well, the answer is yeah, we probably do. But we have to understand that. So there's a series of those questions around dissolved reactive phosphorus that are real challenges, but we know there's good things in place now that help, and other practices we know will continue to help, but we gotta pin down more of it and understand it a little bit better here to make sure that the recommendations aren't counterproductive. For years and years, we've talked about conservation tillage, so reduced tillage. But over time, is reduced tillage the best way and the best thing to do? In some form, probably yes. But are there other practices you should couple with it in order to continue to reduce any nutrient loss? Probably so. So those are great questions that we have to resolve.
Here's another question from the audience. Is it possible to have drinking water separated for water used for manufacturing and farming? And I'm not sure if they mean that water wouldn't have to be as clean if it's used for manufacturing and farming, or what the reason would be to separate that
We're
water?
regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act, and we have maximum contaminant levels that we have to achieve. So we can't put out a secondary quality water.
One more question. How confident are you that the new testing we have in place, Chuck, will prevent another water quality event?
Could define new testing, is that possible? I'm not.
This is just from the audience. I think they want to say...
Our test method is the ELISA test method. It's an enzyme-linked immunoassay test that finds every congener of this type of algae that we have, of microcystis, and the toxin it produces. And we're getting very confident results with it, and that's the test that US EPA would like us to use and Ohio EPA would like us to use currently. We're confident with our results. Our lab just passed our quality assurance last week.
I think that about wraps it up for this group. I want to thank you all very much, Sandy and Chuck and Rich and Adam, for sharing your expertise. Rich, I'm heading up to Lake Erie tomorrow. My husband's taking me to the Island Inn in Port Clinton for our 30th wedding anniversary. So see here, we are staying right here on Lake Erie just for you.
Happy anniversary, and spend lots of money while everybody's in town.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.